So, okay, I'm gonna maybe set the landscape a little bit by giving you guys a study that we covered recently. It's by VMware. They released this study in March where they polled over 2,000 respondents in Asia Pacific. Okay, so one of the questions they asked was basically to find out what happens when there's no IT support, right? When employees don't get any IT support. So 60% in Singapore said they would try and make it work on my own if there is no IT support for personal devices in the office. 52% says they will Google for an answer. So across Asia Pacific, 69% says they will rely on their own IT resources, and 63% said they would Google if there is no IT support. So in light of this discovery, where do you think, or why do you think Asia organizations are they doing enough to support enterprise mobility, which comes with all this BOD, the use of personal devices, and making sure that when the employees are on the go, they are supported? Do you think there's enough support from Asia businesses right now? I'm going to start with Seng, because Seng, you know, NCS, you're an SI, and you deal with the integration, the implementation, and the back end. So when companies or customers come to you, do they think, Seng, tell me, am I doing enough to support my mobile employees, or should I support the personal devices? What's on the ground right now?
Well, actually, the main interest right now in the market, it seems very predominantly is still in engaging the consumers rather than employees. You know, in some of the investment that is going around. I think it's quite obvious because the word consumerization is like the hottest thing about, you know, and everybody is more interested at the end of the day, it's about the final users. So if you're looking at enterprise level, I think there was this hesitation. I think really they are very concerned about security because one thing about mobile devices, as you know, is that it is in the hand of the individuals. We have heard about lawsuits where, you know, people actually wanted to claim back whatever that's in the individual personal device, you know, and they have to go even to the court to demand for it, you know, and we are such a competitive landscape right now. So I think those are probably the reason why enterprises are like a bit behind the curve, you know, in embracing it. And the other issue is about the cost, the budget. Okay, there was a lot of concern about what exactly the budget that we set aside to promote mobilities. You know, because the expectation is more than just fun apps. It's about whether did it really derive productivity gain. So even that question itself is sometimes not answered properly. So there are these questions that is holding the enterprise from actually jumping very strict, you know, eagerly into the mobility space. I think that's a key thing that is, you know. So if you ask me, I think the enterprise generally speaking behind the curve.
Behind the curve is because they don't know where to go to, or there's a lack of focus right now.
I think there was too many questions around.
Right.
Too many questions that they wanted answers, but the answers is not straightforward. You know, first and foremost, it's really this thing about productivity and competitiveness. Does mobility is just a matter of convenience, or it does actually use for productivity that enterprises expected? Whereas in the consumer, it's all about experience. As long as the experience parameter is achieved, the goal is achieved, you know, you make it.
Right.
You know, you make it. But in enterprise, it's not purely experience; it's about the ROI.
Right. So Stuart, with your focus on end user computing, then is that what you're seeing from customers? All they want to know is how many workstations, laptops, do I need to buy to support my employees, and everything else is just, well, whatever goes. Is that what you're seeing right now?
I'd love to say there's one answer, but there isn't. In fact, for every customer I go and see, it's a different answer. But the question still remains the same. You know, hey, typically it's come from the C-level, C-suite. Over 77% of executives bring their own device, you know, whether it's an iPad or whatever it is. So it's there. And the IT guys are typically trying to solve for that. How do I protect, you know, particularly if the exec is carrying all of the crucial information, how do we protect that? So I think there's a level in the organisation that IT needs to look at in terms of who is entitled to bring their own device, step one. Step two, is there a compelling business case for others, the vast majority of employees, to bring their devices to work? And how is that measured? Is it productivity? Is it an image that you want to look cool, or something like that you want to project to the market, etc. A point on consumerization. Consumerization is one thing, and BYOD, in my view, is another. Consumerization, I'll give you an example, Dell. On Dell, we have a great product range called XPS. Really cool, sleek aluminium, carbon fiber, looks fantastic. We have another brand which I saw you use earlier, which is Dell Latitude, which is, if I can say, it's like a Volvo, built strong, tough, a little bit kind of pedestrian in its looks, but it's fantastic. My choice was to actually go for the XPS. I'm allowed to do that. It's on the Dell, approved purchase list internally. So I have the choice between a Latitude or an XPS. That is my view, consumerization, because it's just a different look, different feel. It doesn't have all of the cool stuff that Latitude has, but I don't use them, so it works fine. Customers, typically we've got a Benson Bourne survey here, so I'm pulling out some of the notes from that. 50% of end users that were polled said that they would have no problem breaching corporate policies and bringing their own device. Which is good, it's only 50, but I'd say if you ask that question 2 or 3 times, that'd push up further if you really kind of dug into it a little bit more. Already mentioned 77% of executives and senior management already bring their own devices. And actually a local point for Singapore that actually stood out, because this is a global report, Singapore had the highest weighting on what the individual wanted, rather than what IT said was the best device. So in America, for example, it's reversed. IT departments in America says, users, you will have this device. Whereas IT departments here, and 63% of them, said, okay, user, you tell me what you want, and we'll make it work. Now, that could be, in America, IT departments aren't scared of end users, and they're being far more, forceful or far more restrictive. My gut tells me, having been in Singapore only 6 months, it's probably the latter. That Singapore is far more, look at the place, it's just advancing so rapidly, and it's just enabling a lot of places. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Right, but so I think we kind of agree that there may not be a formal focus or a thought process in terms of how we support all these mobile employees, but we know that employees are doing it, right? I mean, the surveys and the one you cite, Stuart, supports that. So I'm going to ask Jimmy then. Jimmy, when you go out as your PwC day job, you go out there and you talk to all these companies, right? And you tell them, is it really a question of do we want to, rather than we have to, so what do we do now? Is it still I'm not going to touch it because we don't understand it?
Well, I think, back to the first question itself, I want to touch on 2 points. Mobility, right, happens in our organization is either accidental or the organization planned for it. Now, when an organization planned for it, they probably, I would say maybe half of them will start looking at sustainability. That's where the support comes in. That's where the security comes in. That's where everything might come in. Now, a lot of organization in Singapore is accidental. It's because of the voice of the employees. Surprisingly, based on my experience, it is the senior management that first wants to bring, all these devices for the convenience, because they travel, it's convenient. Now, a lot of organizations, especially within the IT departments, did not know how to deal with it. They often would then support for a limited number of users. Sometimes they pilot. But, the strategy, the afterthought, the support, the sustainability program, and more importantly, the security is an afterthought. It's not something they actually plan for.
So that opens a lot of question marks. I mean, from my point of view, so they don't know how to deal with it. It's an afterthought. But what kind of, is it tough? Because it's so tough, they don't want to deal with it, or because they still don't have that mindset of we have to look at this holistically and support it? Is it because it's too tough, or are they scared of it?
Well, I guess, for different organization, I think the constraints is very different, right? In a very regulated industry, for example, let's say banking or pharmaceutical, they also have to take into consideration in terms of data and privacy regimes. That's something a lot more complex, and it's not just a case that 5 senior executives want to bring in an iPad or iPhone. right? Some other organization need to deal with in terms of the availability of IT resources, be it human resource, be it budget. And now I think all this pose real constraint, and because of mobility and mobile devices is actually evolving at a faster pace than IT departments are actually introducing new initiatives, and that's where there is a lag. So I'll say there are various different reasons why people are actually not adopting a very planned approach to mobility adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe John, because you study the market and you study how things are moving and what's picking up. So when you look at things like consumerization, BYOD, enterprise mobility, do you see any foreseeable holes that are opening up that it's gonna alarm bells are ringing?
There's alarm bells ringing all over the place, and one of the reasons is that probably all of the estimates that we've heard so far around the take-up of BYOD, in our experience, are all incorrect. They're all way under what the reality is. We haven't seen an organisation yet that doesn't have BYOD somewhere in the organisation. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of finding it, right? And it will be at the executive level typically. So the question is, if you've got email in your organisation and you allow people to use email, you will have BYOD somewhere in the organisation. And it becomes pervasive over time. So what we've seen is that it starts with mobile enablement. So that is simply enabling access to get, enabling employees to get access to basic services. The email is typically the first and most popular service on all the mobile devices. So there's a very reactive approach to mobility at the moment. Organisations are looking at it and saying, how do we secure these devices? And a mobile device management approach has been the kind of classic approach to solving the challenge, but it is a very tactical approach. They're not really thinking about what mobility may lead to ultimately. So at the moment, it's still very much around access to email, but increasingly and very rapidly, we're seeing mobility now extend into other enterprise applications. Yep. And we're starting to see organisations realising that the devices can do some pretty smart things that traditional technology couldn't do. And we're now starting to see that blurring of the lines between just enabling internal employees to connecting customers, partners, suppliers, even regulators to the core back-end system. So I think that the landscape is changing pretty quickly and pretty dramatically actually.
Yeah. So really the question is to mobile or not to mobile? I think that's one of the questions you'll be asking Stephanie during one of your workshops at Community Asia. So is it still a valid question to mobile or not to mobile? Because whether or not it's a yes or a no, employees are going to do it.
Definitely.
So where do you see then the challenges?
So, if I were to segregate the majority part of the market, first and foremost, we have basically the BB, the BlackBerry translators, right? People who used to use BB for pure email, and typically in a very constrictive or restrictive environment. And, with such users, it becomes definitely a must because of the fact that there are increased adoption of platforms like Android and iOS. It seems like, IT department, would have to basically make the right transition as well from managing of a BB enterprise server to basically something else altogether. With the increase of new platforms that we're seeing on the mobile landscape itself, we also see that, the policies is essentially very, very crucial. And I think this not just in terms of the security and of course the network, etc. But security is always an afterthought. Many times people think that it's a responsibility of the IT department. Whereas, of course, historically for BB, it is really the IT department, right? But then with the emergence of BYOD, it definitely would involve functions like legal, even HR, because then we're talking about privacy earlier, we're talking about compliance, etc. So, with that being said, I feel that the kind of conversations we're hearing from CIO is that they're getting confused, with all the acronyms like MDM, MAN, MIN, BYOD, and just 1,001 acronyms and where to go and what to do, as well as the cost, right? I mean, today to deploy a BB infrastructure is very straightforward. You just need to get an enterprise server with a license, right? But now with MDM, cost has dropped dramatically. But then with the new trend itself, people are saying you should go MAM. So MAM itself, the cost is actually on the higher side as compared to MDM. So cost definitely is a big consideration for a lot of organizations.
Yedo, then I'm just gonna find out from you, when you look at the whole landscape and you talk about supporting your customers in terms of the whole infrastructure, where do you then see, in light of what we've been discussing, where are the 5 top, I guess, leaks or where it's a danger point that companies are still not really looking to address with the movement towards enterprise mobility, personal devices? Where do you see the 5 big holes?
So what I see is actually that our clients are still behind the curve, right? They have seen enterprise mobility first as a threat. Now slowly they start to realize that it can actually be a big opportunity. It's not only about employee productivity, it's about optimizing internal business processes and actually optimizing the channel. So they start to realize that they really need to address this. Yes, it's happening. There is already bring your own device in all organizations, but they need to get their strategy right, they need to get their policies right. And if they look at enterprise mobility, it's complex, it's daunting, costs, support, but also the complexity. It's not a typical IT project. It is across the board. It's HR, it is legal, it is finance. Oh yes, it's IT, it is CEO. Everybody has a stake in enterprise mobility deployments across the organization. Support is a big issue. Actually, our global secure enterprise mobility survey, this Dimension Data study, showed that only 31% of our clients have actually a support model in place for mobiles and mobility. That means that it is still not mature. They are working on it, but it is very daunting. It is the variety of devices, OSs, applications that now needs to be supported by that sports organization, and they're not ready for that, and they don't have a stringent policy in place. So they need to get their act together, how to support the end user when it comes to the enterprise mobility. The biggest holes are obviously the data replication. Data is now copied everywhere. We on this table probably have 4 or 5 instances of the same mailbox across the different platforms, right? We used to have one managed device from the corporation and there was the email. Now it's all over the place. We bring in our own applications. Bring your own device means bring your own application. It means backup software, note-taking software. The data goes everywhere and there's no proper SLA in place. And then obviously the unmanaged devices taking into the infrastructure. We used to come from that well-maintained, closed-down PC, and now we have that 5, 6, 7 variations of that mobile device. What is it doing actually in the infrastructure? And how does the IT security officer, does he cope, and how does he provide the compliance, the control that he's required to have in place?
I'm gonna open up the 5 data leaks to you guys later, but storage guy, come on. Where data is your expertise here, so I'm sure you have lots to tell us about what's this that customers are doing that you're finding, why are they still not thinking straight about in terms of protecting the data in light of all this mobility?
So BYOD is not a train that left the station. It's a tsunami that's coming our way. I mean, every enterprise customer we have met is concerned about that. It makes sense, and if it's not for productivity, they have to do it just to keep their employees happy. It's something that they have to do. One of the things that our enterprise customers have told us at Hitachi Data Systems is they are not concerned about the security of their own BYOD initiative. What they're concerned about is their employees using public cloud utilities if BYOD becomes too restrictive. That's one of the biggest concerns they have. What they're trying to do is strike a balance between a restrictive BYOD and what employees get as a consumer. We conducted a survey with our enterprise customer in APAC, and we found out that 1 in 2 employees who know that Dropbox is banned would still use it. 50% of the employees, they know it's banned, they would use it. Why? Because it's simple. Our enterprise customers are trying to figure out how to create a BYOD policy that allows consumer or their employees to move from the consumer utilities back to BYOD. Angry Birds, by the way, has been a big point of contention, believe it or not. Angry Bird is one of the top blacklisted applications on the employee devices.
What?
And I mean, Dropbox makes sense. It has data. Why Angry Birds? Because Angry Birds pick up a lot of personal information from the mobile device and it sends out to the third party. We all say I agree, and that I agree button is a very dangerous button to click when you have Angry Birds. Employees wouldn't be happy if you give them a device that doesn't have an Angry Bird, right? So these are the kind of things so that's one thing. How do they make it not restrictive enough that it really become a meaningful way of securing the data? Number two, human error. Technology can fix the problem. I mean, it's evolving, it's not there, it's not perfect. It would never be perfect when it comes to security. But CIOs are concerned, how do they keep data safe when there's a human error? What happens if I forgot my laptop? Somebody steals my iPad from Starbucks. What happens then? Whom does he call? It comes back to support. Whom does he call up? How much time do we have? Can we remote erase it? The other complications attached to it is if I do a remote wipe, the data is owned, the device is owned by the employee. Who owns that data? There is gray area there. If IT does a remote wipe and everything gets wiped off, will employee accept it? Selective wipe is a lot more difficult thing to do than done. I mean, it's those are the things that worry CIO when it comes to data security. And fortunately, unfortunately, these are not the things that technology can fix. It's a combination of technology, processes, and people. And that's what I think, a combination of that as well.
And I think the summary is also, a lot of enterprises started on this journey, right? But they stumbled over policies like this, right? How do we block Angry Birds? Yes, we block it, but then there's the community, the user community saying, well, I would be able to play Angry Birds after working hours, right? Why would you ban it from my device? And that's why a lot of organizations came into trouble when they started deploying.
Yeah.
But then meanwhile, it is happening anyway.
And the interesting thing in all of that, and we've heard a couple of different stats on this, is if you asked employees would they knowingly and willingly break HR policies on sexual harassment in the workplace, they would have a very different view.
Yeah.
But with BYOD, they see this as a right, rather than a privilege from the organisation. So I think one of the challenges is to change the emphasis from the device. It's not really BYOD. We talked about BYO applications, but it's really BYO data. And that's really what employees want to bring into the organisation. So, it used to be BlackBerries were the flavour of the day. Then iPhones became, the device of choice. Android has become more popular as a platform, and the devices will probably change throughout the next, 10 years. But the fundamental principle remains the same: is employees want to bring their own data. And use their own data in that way. And they're also responding to the pressures that organisations are placing on them to get their jobs done. And I think that's also one of the challenges, is if you were stuck in an office at a desk with a computer that was supplied to you, and you started at 9 and left at 5, and you weren't expected to do anything else, you'd probably be fine with a corporate issued device. But when the organisation is asking you to be on call after hours and be responsive to some of these situations, not many people have pages anymore. Emails kind of replace the pager because it gives you much richer context of information. So we've seen some really interesting things, like even right back in the days of the BlackBerry, where people were talking about the secure email capabilities of BlackBerry. Where an organisation, major shipping company, issued BlackBerries to most of its executives on the basis that by having that instant access, they were able to avert a situation which would have cost them more than $10 million. And by using the instant communications of these devices, they felt that they averted this particular situation. When they did an investigation, they actually found that the problem was caused by somebody sending a message on their BlackBerry device without actually going through the proper process, and so the device was actually the cause of the problem and the resolution to the problem in itself. And I think this is one of the challenges that we're seeing organisations facing is, how much of this is driven by the employee need or their, feeling as it's a right, and how much of it is true productivity, and how do we get that balance? Somebody else talked about the balance before, and I think that's really critical.
Right. In fact, BYOD is actually not a technology, it's a phenomenon. If you were to ask some of the HR today, they'll probably tell you that today enterprise don't just choose the employee is choosing the employer as well. So if they enter organization, especially a Gen Z, X, Y, whatever, they find that if the organization is not up to the mark, they might just move on, because they find that this is not in line with their aspiration of a workforce, And I think on top of that, I think BYOD technology can only go so far. I think you still have to go something very fundamental, which is about educations, like you mentioned, policies, because it is almost impossible to lock it in. It's simply impossible. People are taking cameras, freak it out, whatever is on the board, they take a picture. They say it's for record because it's productive, but next moment, you can go anywhere. So I think you can't exactly stop it, lock it in, but you have to look at it from the holistic point of view. So I think going forward, I believe that we'll be looking at areas like, for example, the app security, the data security, the access control, and ultimately protect your enterprise so that if there's a leak, okay, where do you contain the damage so that it is manageable?
A clear distinction between enterprise data and personal data.
Yeah.
Maybe even derived also from the OS level itself, where you really have a corporate environment and personal environment, or corporate apps which can easily controlled and remotely wiped by the organization if the device is lost. All the personal data is not touched, but it's also providing, for example, advantages to the employee. And I'm 100% with you on, you can't attract the key talent if you don't have a decent enterprise mobility policy or strategy in place, but also providing personal backup or additional applications, so make it more attractive for the employees to also give a bit of controls away when it comes to the enterprise data.
We're gonna try and talk a little bit more about the strategy and what to, how we then implement one that's ideal, the balance between corporate and personal. But before that, I would like to first talk to Seng Chai and really come to the core of the discussion here. How real though are the issues? We've been talking about mobile and how this opens up a lot of vulnerability, and how the devices that are unsecure and protected are really the weakest link. Are they really the weakest link? Are we really seeing malware now that have real world business potential risks, and they're targeting the mobile device to get into the corporate network? I mean, right now there's been a lot of I would say speculation and maybe talk about it, how the device unprotected is really the hole that will bring the hackers straight into the corporate network. Is that what you're seeing right now? Is the device really the weakest link right now?
I think first of all, we must agree that a mobile device, whether it's a handphone, a tablet, is a computer. So as soon as the mobile device is attached to the corporate network, it becomes an access point for cyber criminals who are skillful enough to gain access to various parts of the enterprise network. So from that perspective, this device is basically a door to the enterprise network. Now, when it comes to malware, as far as we know, there isn't, or at least we have not seen a malware that cause huge destruction to enterprise network that runs on a mobile device like say Android or Apple iOS. But that doesn't mean there isn't one out there. Recently or recent years, in fact recent months, the term APT is very popular, Advanced Persistent Threat. And nobody knows whether there's something out there that is lurking somewhere in somebody's network, somewhere around the world. And how does that malware get onto the enterprise network? Well, it could be really from a mobile device, or if we broaden the definition of a mobile device. Could we say that a USB thumb drive is a mobile device? I think that definition is yes. So, and from that perspective, yes, the malware did get into the corporate network from a USB thumb drive.
Yep.
So the answer to your question is yes. In a broader context of how we define mobile devices.
So, but I mean, anyone can jump in here at this point. No one's just waiting for me to call a name. But looking at me intently.
You told us we had to.
Yeah. No one's gonna raise hands. I'll just jump in. But that kind of leads me to that, this perception, right? I mean, a lot of the news headlines the headlines that we write ourselves, it's mostly network, hackers going into the breaching the network itself, the servers, the server farm, the infrastructure, the data centers. Mobile devices, not so much just yet. We don't really hear the big news about how a hacker or anonymous or some hacker group targeting like 50,000 devices to attempt to get into a corporate network. Do you think that's the point that's making the CIOs and IT departments and companies going, yeah, BOD, consumerization, yeah, but let's really focus on network for now?
So for me, where is the data? What is it really that the hackers or cyber criminals are after? That's the data.
Yeah.
That's in the network, that's on the PCs. We're not very familiar in the way they use mobile devices to get access to that network, right? I mean, if you look at Android, and you are the one who could give more detail on how many viruses and malware is out there on mobile devices, it is plenty. But how is it used, right? There are APTs, there are targeted attacks on mobile devices. That information is used to gain access to the network. Not so much to the mobile device, because the data and all the sensitive information is in the network and in the data center.
I agree.
Yeah, our customers at Hitachi Data Systems told us, from a storage perspective, they almost assume that networks are going to get hacked. That's the assumption that they have. I think what they're trying to do is build another layer of protection at the storage layer. They assume networks are not perfect. They would never be perfect. Hackers are a smart set of people. What they're trying to do is build another layer of security at a storage layer and say, let's have some PCI certification for storage. Let's do some high level of encryption. Let's change the encryption keys every 12 months. Things like that is what they're trying to do to keep the data safe. I think the reason why we haven't heard the news that you were mentioning is because hackers find it a lot easier to hack not via mobile but directly via network. So, and again, to his point, data is not living on the mobile devices. The data thereafter is living in a very safe place inside the data center. And mobile could be one of the ways to get to that data. But our customers are building another layer of security on the storage layer to keep it safe.
Yes, so I agree. I think mobile is basically just another channel. But the truth of the matter is, based on FireEye kind of analysis itself, as research, is that 95% of the companies are already compromised. So, whether they adopt BYOD or not, seriously, they are already compromised. The back door is already open. So, with that being said, of course, BYOD still bring their own set of challenges. Especially, we see an increase in terms of, applications that basically contain malware. They may look legitimate when you first download it, but then, every time we have to go and upgrade the versions of our application, and subsequent application or versions could actually be infected by malware. And we are seeing that the apps have actually become another point of vulnerability, not just the device, the hardware itself, but also what is within the device. And of course, when you have any kind of classical example of spear phishing, emails, you open it up, you get yourself infected, and then that particular infection could actually be brought back into your network when you're connected to the wireless, etc. So, like I said, I would think that it's not so much of the fact that we still don't see huge damages from BYOD when it comes to security, but it's more of the fact that there are many areas to look at. And traditionally for APT, like what Sin Chai mentioned, they are very silent in nature. They are not like the hacktivists where they try to deface websites. Those are very public and noisy. They basically do it so as to I would say make a stance or to make a statement. But for APT itself, they are usually very targeted and very silent. Many times companies don't even realize that they have already been compromised.
Yeah, I think I'll add on a couple of things. First, right, the lack of a publicized incident doesn't mean that there is no such threat. We have to recognize, right, that mobile devices are considered as carriers. Now, that's one criteria. Second thing, right, that mobile devices are connected both within the enterprise as well as the individual's home. Now, the level of security between these two environments are very different. Now, in an enterprise, hopefully there's good level of security, be it data protection, malware, virus protection. You cannot assume the user of the mobile device have the same level of security at home. But this device is connected to both. This then poses a carrier that could introduce, be it files with virus, be it malware, be it APT zero-day vulnerabilities that could be introduced into the enterprise. So I think, you know, this particular threat of mobile devices introducing security risk to our organization is very, very real.
So, but that comes back to the point that PK and Gendo mentioned. Do we then just, it's really about the data, right? I mean, wherever that data is where we need to protect. So, is it really a question of do we protect device and everything that touches the corporate network, or do we just basically look to protect the data, which is the main asset here? Whether or not it's a thumb drive or a mobile device or a tablet, or you're in the office and accessing the network, as long as you protect the data, it's fine, right? We don't care about the mobile devices, we just protect the back end of the data. John?
Certainly, you know, Forrester's view, and we have a security analyst, John Kinvag, who talks about zero trust networks. And the idea is that, you know, you used to have the philosophy of, you know, trust but verify. So you would go through a process of making sure that a device was trusted, making sure that it met all the policies, and you would implement that on the network. And then it was a legitimate device on that network, and it would have full trust of the network resources, or the network itself would be trusted. Now that situation's changed, and the default position should be don't trust anything and verify everything. And that's a very different security approach for most organizations. They don't have the resources in place to do that. They don't necessarily have the skills and expertise to do that. And in many cases, that's why we've seen cloud computing become quite attractive, because they look at the cloud providers and they often have you know, better security practices than what organizations have in their own enterprise. I think one of the challenges, though, is that when you look at some of the cloud providers, there is still some major gaps, and one of them is the classic situation where there's no data encryption and segmentation within a cloud provider sometimes, and it's quite surprising to see some of even the biggest cloud providers you know, really don't have some of those basics in place either.
And
so
it's
I think
not easy for organizations to verify, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly
there's no
right.
transparency.
Exactly right. So I think, you know, one of the challenges is, if you look at the way security's been implemented in traditional IT, if we want to think of it that way, you know, who's had the most access to all corporate resources? It's generally a system administrator who's probably a, you know, quite lowly paid guy who's getting whipped every day to you know, make something available to the executive who wants it, and he's the one who's got the keys to the kingdom. You know, we really haven't moved away from that model yet, and I'm always surprised that we haven't done more to change that model of a very hierarchical security model, which we see in most organizations. You know, there's a root administrator to an application or a database or the network, and those control systems are very hierarchical. So the targets, as we were saying before, you know, the targets are the highest level you can get to within an application, the network, a database, wherever you find that data. That's really where these guys are going to be targeting. That's the biggest return.
For me, the question actually you ask is, should you focus on the network, the device, and actually it is the application.
Right.
Organizations should be paying more attention on securing the application and the access to that application. And that's going to be a combination of app security, also network security, to make sure that application and the underlying infrastructure is maintained secure. And also, you can't deny that you need to have some controls or control on the endpoint and on the device itself to make sure that it is remains intact, because the app on the device needs to have its integrity and its security as well. Because if the OS of the device is compromised, the access to the app, and it's very difficult to make sure the app is not compromised.
But doesn't the cloud then complicate things a little? As John was saying, Dropbox.
Look at the cloud, look at the ASP. I mean, enterprise mobility, we now have the carriers in the equation, right? We used to have that VPN tunnel, and it didn't matter which network you used. But now we have a mobile device roaming in the US to Costa Rica for a Singapore client.
Right.
The 4G network, the 3G network, the Wi-Fi, the hotspots, everything is now more chaotic than ever. And that's why the importance of the app security is so dominant, and the controls in place.
But it's not always transparent, as John says. You don't know how the cloud service providers are actually protecting the app.
They don't. They give hardly any. So there's a big assumption that cloud providers have better security. There is theoretically the opportunity for a data center, for an ASP provider to have decent security in place. But it's an assumption, often very difficult to verify for clients, because the SLA just states it's a SAS70 or it is secure, trust us. But if you want to know the details around how that security is being set up, it's a big silent. So there's also a big call to the ASP providers and the cloud providers to provide more transparency to their clients.
Right.
And that's also why there's still a large chunk of the market having some reluctance to go to cloud providers, because that transparency is not there, and then they start building their private clouds.
Yeah.
And not without a reason.
I think one of the reasons why our customers I've seen are focusing a lot on securing the device is for two reasons. Number one, network security has existed as long as the networks have existed. So I think they think they've probably got a handle on that. Application is something, to his point, they believe they don't have a control over. And that's why they're not they're not aiming at securing the application, because they want to have one of the biggest principles of BYOD is going to increase the productivity. Employees should be able to download more or less most of the things. So that's the main reason why they're focusing on device security, and things like MDM are becoming popular. One of the reasons why I believe there's a buzzword about device security is it's new. It reminds me of the days when laptops were fresh. The VPs of the companies would carry the laptops, and when I started my career, I would aspire to get a laptop, and slowly they got a handle to it. They figured out how to secure data on laptop, and I think we are at that stage with mobile devices. And again, I would say, as far as cloud is concerned, one of the CIOs told us, he said they have about 900 employees, a large bank in Indonesia. They have 900 employees using Dropbox, and he said Dropbox. They met somebody from Dropbox, and they said, no, we don't have an access to the data in the cloud. And somewhere Dropbox mentioned we can single instance files coming from anybody in the world. So there may be a user in Indonesia and a user in Costa Rica. They may be uploading the same file, and he said if I read that means they do have an access to the data. And that's why it's hazy.
Yeah. So, but if you look at SingChai, then, since you're the research expert here in terms of platform, when you talk about apps, Android, iOS, it's games, Angry Birds, I don't know, Candy Crush, what's the latest, My Little Pony. When we talk about corporate applications still, are you seeing companies when they start thinking, I need to give access on the mobile to my applications, to my employees, so they can work 24 hours a day? Is that app that sits on the mobile device, on the Android OS or iOS, is it safe enough in your view right now, when you're monitoring all this data and malware?
I think application-wise, it all boils down to the developers,
Right.
or the programmers who develop the software. I think nobody can say that their software is 100% secure. Every day around the world, there are smart people reverse engineering softwares, trying to find vulnerabilities on simple applications, daily applications that everybody use. Some of which are from major vendors, some browsers, and there are a very, very active community of vulnerability researchers who who actually conduct research on browsers security. So at any point of time, if a vulnerability were to be discovered and a zero-day exploit were to be written, and so unfortunately, if it were to be released to the wild, to the public, any device that uses that app or that browser could potentially be open to
Right.
being compromised. And if we go one level lower, the operating system itself on the mobile device, I think it was just 2 days ago, BlackBerry themselves released a vulnerability on their own OS. So again, if today if somebody were to be using BB, they are open to that challenge. So until somebody, usually the vendor of course, who comes out and patch it, or in that of course alternative the enterprise can adopt, everybody who uses that app is going to be vulnerable to that extent. I think the issue with BYOD or mobile devices being brought into enterprise is that as all the participants has mentioned, there are a lot of constraints from the companies, whether to give or not to give. The line is very grey. So there is no perfect solution. One could argue that a company could devise a policy and says, okay, I will have a selection of devices. Maybe these 10 devices are only allowed in my enterprise. And if you are an employee, I could buy that device for you or subsidize the device for you in one way, in one form or another. But having had that device in your possession, you are then, liable and to follow the policy that has been set down. So that might be one way to have some control, but it is not perfect. And as Guido has mentioned, we should focus on protection on the network, the app, and the endpoint level.
Exactly.
Those are just those just opens many vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Yep.
I think one of the challenges is that this is still the very early days of mobility, true mobility. And so when we look at how we've used technology in the past, it used to literally be in a locked room somewhere in the organisation. That's where your computing resources were. And there was a lot of security around keeping that room contained. As we started to move to from the mainframe era into the PC era, we had to let go of some of those controls. But the main thing that we've seen is we're still stuck in this era of policy enforcement, that technology is enforcing policy. So being the early days of mobility, what we're seeing is very reactive. It's implementing a mobile device management platform which gives people a sense of security because it enables them to lock down a policy. But in the case of issuing a device to an employee that you think is an approved device, they then want to install their own applications on that device anyway. And then if you're going to stop them doing that, you're going to lose some of the productivity benefits, all the reasons that we talked about before. So I think one of the changes that we're likely to see in technology itself as the technology starts to mature is this move from policy enforcement to policy reinforcement. So you're actually helping people make better decisions about how they access information, how they share information. So we've got some good examples from organisations where they had very restricted lockdown devices and information was being leaked from those devices. And what they found was people were doing screenshots on the mobile device of information that they had access to and then emailing those screenshots. It's a very easy bypass of the security controls that you put in place. So you can put all the HR policies in place about what you should do as a standard practice and who you shouldn't share information with and how you should share sensitive information, all those things. But I think one of the things we're likely to see is that the technology will evolve and some of these solutions will become more policy driven and they will not enforce policies, but they will help users make better decisions about what they can and should do based on those corporate rules, if you want to think of it that way.
Stuart, do you have something to
I was just going to make a point on to your point earlier about the operating system level. I mean, there's three players out there. We haven't really spoken about Windows Mobile. or Windows 8, 8.1 at this point. Look, it's still, you know, in at least the 11-inch space, so we're talking the iPad space, you know, it's still got about 10 to 13% market share in that space, right? So it's coming, it's growing. And I think, you know, from the customers and the partners that we have discussions with regularly, is typically customers and partners are comfortable with Microsoft because when the threat is understood, it is patched, right? We can all whinge about, you know, every third Tuesday of the month or whatever it is, it's Microsoft patch day. But that's actually a cadence, right? And that's actually come from years of expectancy theory, if you like, of what to expect. Android, that doesn't exist. It's open, and it's open because anyone can actually edit the kernel of the operating system. That's a threat, big threat, right? And customers and partners don't know how to solve for that. Anyone can make changes. iOS, not as quite as vulnerable. However, Apple have been pinged quite badly of late because they're very slow to patch their threats. So I think, you know, from an enterprise point of view, and you know, I deal a lot with enterprise customers and partners who support enterprise customers. It's really the devil you know, right? I know Microsoft. I know they will have vulnerabilities, and I'll know from an endpoint perspective they'll be patched in due course. I don't know about Apple. I don't know about Android. And I think that this is part of the consideration from an endpoint view at least.
I feel that maybe what can help an enterprise to be more focused is to look at the right perspective, because what is their real concern? Data leak, device as the weakest link in terms of access to the network, or the application security, you know, which itself means that the data itself that is in transit, you know, will be exposed. You know, so once they got these three, I think they probably can focus, you know, and they'll get the priority right, you know, in that sense. So I think there's of course an increasing trend towards what we call life cycle management ultimately, because I think security is not only technical. Security is also about business operations, whether your business will be handicapped or retarded because you are being compromised, you know, and you need to recover back quickly. So that is becoming an important consideration. So it's not just focused on the device, it is really about the entire holistic approach. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the kind of solutions out in the market are a little bit fragmented. I guess, you know, people always say that, well, you have the MDM checkbox, you're done. But, you know, we have challenges with MDM because in short, MDM is just more of the management of devices to stop. Right. So I think IT practitioner or security practitioner may not recognize the fact that MDM is not just a full stop. There's actually more to it. So like what was mentioned when it comes to network, when it comes to application, etc.
It is a very tactical response. It's almost like an insurance policy. Yeah, we've done something, we've implemented something, so we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a final question before Tony start rumbling, I'm gonna assume that all of us here are policymakers and we're strategists, right? And then we're going around the table and ask, in light of what we've discussed in the past 30-45 minutes, we know that it's a wild west out there where we don't know, it's chaotic, apps are coming from everywhere, from internally, from cloud providers, we don't know whether that's safe, and we're trying not to breach our employees' personal rights to choosing to put in an Angry Bird if they wanted to or not, but we also need to secure the company. So with all this consideration in mind, and all these elements and components floating out there, give me that one must-have component that if we are part of this one company, that we need to have to ensure that with all this enterprise mobility, BOD stuff, when we go around the table and we have like 8 components, we'll have a holistic, nice little strategy that we can put in place. So one each from each of you, and then we'll see if will that solve the problem for all of us. So maybe Stephanie, you go first.
In terms of the security focus?
Yeah, so we're trying to build a strategy right now that looks at all this, addresses this problem that we've been discussing for the past 30 minutes. Give me that one component. It can be a policy, it can be a technology, it can be anything, an advice or a compliance kind of a look at it. What would that one thing be?
From a security standpoint, of course, we still believe that the network security is still going to be the key, because like what we said a couple of times in the conversation is the fact that the data resides within the network. So regardless of today, whether we're talking about iPhones, tablets, laptops, USB thumb drives, etc., we must make sure and be very vigilant when it comes to network security. And even though network security has been around as long as what network has been, the reality is that 95% of the networks today are still compromised. I think it's also because of the fact that the defenses that we have today basically fall short when it comes to the new attacks that we are seeing. So hackers have become a lot more sophisticated, but not our precaution or our protection.
John?
Well, there's one phrase that kind of sums up the view of security and how people should respond to it, and that is it's not the strongest fortress that survives, it's the one that can respond most quickly to changing threats. And so the emphasis needs to move not away from locking things down, but a greater emphasis on surveillance and the ability to respond very quickly to those changing threats. I think the two keys is it is about zero trust networks, zero trust devices, and thinking much more about activity rather than borders and gateways and firewall controls.
Yeah, I would really encourage organizations at this juncture to look into data security. I think there are a lot of emphasis on network application. These are necessary. But because IT through mobility is becoming porous, a lot of data is actually creeping out from the enterprise. And if you think about it, at the mobile devices, we are not dealing with a lot of data. It's not about the volume, but it's the value of this data. Through our email communication, some things we deal with are very important. The chat messages that you have with colleagues sometimes are also very important to our organization. Now, our organization must learn to deal with this porous infrastructure and how data are actually leaving the organization and how to keep them secure.
Xin-Fan?
I think it comes down to the human. So I would think constant and consistent security awareness education in an enterprise is very, very important. I have known companies who conduct just once a year for the entire company who has 1,000 employees. That will not work. So I think focused, consistent, and really valuable security awareness program within an enterprise. The company could work with an outside vendor or consultants like the Big Fours, or some vendors who were able to provide that valuable education. I think that is very important because at the end of the day, it is the humans who gives up who leak the data for the matter.
Yeah. Stuart?
Sure. I guess taking everything into consideration over the last hour or so, I think if someone could come up with a killer device that everybody wanted to use and everybody wanted to bring into their work mode, that would, when you brought it into the environment, you dock it, and then when you docked it, it would get rid of the original operating system and just boot up to a separate operating system that was fine, on the corporate network. Hey, this doesn't exist, right?
It does, but no one wants to use it. That's
right. And it would define. I mean, ultimately, it won't matter, right? We understand the networks are porous. We understand that nowhere is perfect. We understand that the strongest fortress often doesn't survive. Remember the Alamo. We have to respond real fast, and IT really need to kind of understand how to deliver that.
Yeah.
What information is available, and to who, and what is restricted, and to who.
Yeah.
I think if they can base on that and actually tell people why that's restricted to them, I think that helps in the constant education. But you can't educate stupid. Sorry.
That's going to be the quote of the day.
Say it one more time loudly.
I
Right,
was
you can't educate the okay.
I feel that we are like in a fitness center where you're jumping on the tractor and the tractor just keep on going, and as you although it's the same speed, at some point in time your heartbeat will start to accelerate, and you just have to stay on with it. So I think the challenge about this whole thing is about how do you actually look after the human factors ultimately? I still think that the only safeguard is really about human factors. The awareness and the knowledge. I think the other thing about this so-called tractor concept is that also not to be over obsessed, because if you are too careful and too particular about security, my point is there's no point coming out with a solution, a function that is so tightly, so your hands are all tied. And in the end, it is not useful at all. Then I think by all means don't even do it in the first place. So I think a banker told me many years ago that like a banking industry is about risk management. It's not about helping you to manage your money. So I think likewise in mobility, at the end of the day, your policy must be really about what is really you are out to get, to achieve. And at the end of the day, it's about risk management. And risk changes constantly. So you just have to go on with it.
Mobile devices are going to be part of the enterprise network, whether we like it or not. It's going to happen. I think one of the key things that employees are looking for, the reason why they like mobile devices, tablets, is to portability. It's easy to carry, but most importantly, applications, apps that have changed the life. I think as an organization, if you're part of one, I think we need to give them a safer alternatives. We just can't make a policy and say, you cannot use this app, period. Well, they'll find a way to use that. That's how the life is. We need to tell them, if you like this app and it's helping you perform your work better, that app is not safe. We would give you an app that's safer. We need to give them a safer alternative to employees. And if we don't do that as part of a policy, I think that it's a matter of time we would fail. Data is going to sit outside the data center, somewhere in the cloud, and nobody likes it. And the loss of control of data is something that's a big threat, and I think we can solve it by giving them a safer alternative.
So come up with your own Dropbox or your own
Absolutely.
Angry Bird.
That would be a hard sell.
I would be doing this.
Angry Eagle.
HDS or rewriting.
All right, for me, the one pointer which I would give to organizations and enterprises is to establish a strategy, an enterprise mobility strategy, which should be deployed on boardroom level. It should comprise of the benefits, business process optimization, employee productivity, getting the right talent into the organization. It should have a strategy on the whole ecosystem, that is devices, that is network connectivity, that is the security policy, the overall HR legal policies, right? And that should also include, for example, the support models. If a hospital is going to use iPads for their doctors and to sit down with the patients and discuss the surgery upcoming, then there needs to be an SLA in place. If the device breaks down, there's a replacement within 3 hours. So support is part of it. How to procure, how to source a new iPad on the other side of the world. It must be enterprise grade. So the strategy, the benefits, how it's going to be executed, that should be nailed down. And don't start boiling the ocean. Start small business units, small processes. You can't eat it all in once, but you need to have that holistic approach and strategy.
Right. Does anyone have any full stops or exclamation marks to add in before we close? We're good? Great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. It was a really interesting discussion.
Thank
We'll
you.
have lunch.